There's something almost cinematic about the way sunlight spills through the kitchen window on a quiet Saturday morning. The smell of fresh coffee wraps around the air, blending with the distant hum of my mom humming along to a 90s love song. My father is out back, trimming hedges with that precision he's always prided himself on. My little brother, Leo, is tapping away on his tablet at the kitchen island, legs swinging freely as if the world could never touch him. And Mira, my sister, is sitting across from him, still in pajamas, a mug of black tea cradled in her hands, legs tucked up like a cat perched for warmth. That was our family on the surface. Neat, orderly, the kind that sent Christmas cards with everyone wearing color-coordinated sweaters and beaming into the lens like they weren't 2 seconds away from biting each other's heads off. But we were good at playing our parts. Mira especially. She was the oldest, 17, and already a force to be reckoned with. Straight-A student. Captain of the track team. She had this strange combination of grit and grace, the kind that made you feel both intimidated and comforted by her in the same breath. Everyone at school either respected her or tried desperately to be her. Teachers adored her. Parents envied my parents for having a daughter like her. At home, though, she was quieter. Not withdrawn, just watchful. She always seemed to be calculating something, like she was 10 steps ahead of everyone else and just waiting for the rest of us to catch up. Still, Mira always pulled more weight around the house than any of us. Groceries? Done. Leo's science fair diorama? She stayed up till 2 a.m. hot gluing model volcanoes together. Our family didn't run without her. And maybe that was part of the problem. But you wouldn't think it, looking in from the outside. Dad worked in finance, analytical, blunt, a man of logic and structure. Mom stayed home, but she ran the place like a private school principal. She had schedules for everything: meals, chores, screen time, and what she liked to call family enrichment blocks, which were just lectures in disguise. Leo was the baby, 10 years old and pampered in ways Mira and I had never been. You could see it in how they looked at him. Like he was the last golden thread holding the family tapestry together. We weren't rich, not in the flashy way some of Myra's friends were. But we had a big house on a quiet street, 2 cars in the driveway, and matching dinner plates for every holiday. Mira and I shared a bathroom growing up. Our hallway had those old family portraits from Sears with everyone standing stiff like mannequins pretending to laugh. I guess what I'm trying to say is, we looked like a family that had it all figured out. Like nothing could break us. We were wrong. And it all started unraveling faster than I ever thought it could. If there were warning signs, they were subtle at first. Nothing you'd look at twice. A tone that was just a little too sharp. A door closed a little too hard. Moments that didn't scream trouble but whispered something wasn't quite right. And yet, most days, everything looked normal. Dad had this habit of praising Mira in public and policing her in private. He'd brag to his colleagues about her grades and trophies, but at the dinner table, he'd pick apart her attitude like it was a stock report. "You're being defensive," he'd say whenever she pushed back. "You need to learn to listen." It was never a discussion. Always a correction. Mira rarely said much in return, but I noticed her jaw clenched a little tighter each time. Mom, on the other hand, had this way of cutting Mira down with a smile. "Don't get cocky," she'd tease after Mira aced an exam. "It's not like you discovered electricity." When Mira got invited to a leadership summit, Mom rolled her eyes and said, "Try not to act superior when you get back." It was always a joke. Always. But Leo? He was untouchable. He could do no wrong. If he spilled juice on the rug, Mira got asked why she wasn't watching him. If he lost his schoolbooks, Mira was blamed for not helping him organize. I remember once she forgot to pack his lunch for a field trip, and Mom acted like she'd deliberately starved him. And yeah, you read that right, she forgot. Not our parents. Mira. Even I used to joke that she was the third parent, but now that I look back, it wasn't funny. It was just true. Still, Mira never exploded. Never snapped. She swallowed it all with this eerie grace, like she was storing every slight, every jab, somewhere deep inside where none of us could see. At least, that's what I thought. It was around then that she started spending more time in her room. I'd hear her typing late into the night, fast and furious, and sometimes I'd catch her whispering on the phone. She stopped asking for help with anything, stopped volunteering to cook or clean unless someone asked. When she smiled, it didn't reach her eyes anymore. Just a ghost of what it used to be. Leo didn't notice any of it. Or maybe he did and just didn't care. He was too busy being adored, wrapped in the constant comfort of being the family's golden child. If he ever needed anything, it appeared: snacks, new video games, rides to his friends' houses. And Mira never said no. Not even once. She kept playing the part. She still helped him with homework. Still tied his shoelaces when he forgot how. Still stood in the rain for an hour after his soccer practice when Dad forgot to pick him up. Looking back, I think that was the beginning of the storm. The part where the air gets too quiet and everything feels too still. We all kept pretending the glass wasn't cracking. But Mira? She saw every fracture, every tiny fault line. And she was just waiting quietly, patiently, for the moment they'd finally shatter. There's something eerily deceptive about a family that functions on routine. From the outside, it looks like stability, reliability. But in our house, routine was just a way to keep chaos on a leash. Every day followed the same pattern, almost like a ritual. Dad left for work by 7:30, coffee thermos in hand, earbuds in before anyone could ask him a question. Mom hovered in the kitchen like a headmistress on patrol, ensuring everything was clean enough to pass an inspection no one had scheduled. Leo would shuffle to the breakfast table with hair sticking up in every direction, demanding pancakes or cereal or both. Mira? Mira moved like clockwork. Bag packed the night before. Alarm set. Shoes by the door. Always one step ahead, always predictable. Almost military. I remember thinking how strange it was that someone so capable could seem so invisible in her own home. School was her sanctuary, if you could even call it that. She had friends, sure, smart girls with blunt eyeliner and full calendars, the type who were already running student-led nonprofits. But Mira never brought anyone home. Not since sophomore year. She said it was because the house was always too loud or messy, or that Mom made her friends uncomfortable. But I think the truth was simpler. She didn't want anyone to see how we really lived. Every Friday, we had family dinner. It sounded wholesome on paper. In practice, it was a barely concealed inspection followed by a critique. Dad would ask about school, but his questions were less about interest and more about efficiency. What's your SAT score now? How many APs this semester? Are you networking? Mira would answer, chin lifted, voice neutral. She'd mastered the art of answering without inviting further questions. Leo got praised just for existing. One time, he burped mid-sentence and Mom called him adorably spontaneous. Mira rolled her eyes, and I saw Dad narrow his. That's how it went. One rule for Mira, another for the rest of us. And me? I just floated in the middle. I wasn't the problem child or the star. I was the narrator no one listened to, just observing it all unfold. I didn't question the imbalance. I'd been raised not to. You don't bite the hand that feeds you, right? You just try not to get bitten harder. But Mira, something in her started shifting. Subtle at first. The quiet moments became quieter. She stopped offering updates. She stopped apologizing for things that weren't her fault. One night, after Leo spilled juice on her laptop, she didn't yell or cry like I half expected. She just looked at him, really looked at him, and said, "One day, you're going to wish you knew how to clean up your own mess." Leo blinked like she'd spoken another language. Mom barely looked up from her magazine. And Dad? He chuckled and said, "Let him be a kid, Mira. You're not his mother." She didn't answer. Just got up from the table, laptop dripping in her hands, and left the room. The house fell into silence for a few seconds too long after that. That was the last time I saw her smile under this roof. And we had no idea how much damage was brewing under that silence. It happened on a Tuesday. A day so painfully ordinary it almost felt cruel in retrospect. The sky was overcast, the kind that presses on your mood like a weighted blanket. Mira had just gotten home from school. She barely made it past the front door before Mom's voice came shrieking down the hall. In the living room. Now, I was on the stairs. I remember that vividly, my foot halfway between two steps, my stomach twisting without knowing why. Mira froze, still gripping the strap of her backpack. Her eyes flicked toward me, just once, and I'll never forget the look there. Not fear. Not confusion. Resignation. She dropped her bag silently and walked toward the voices. I followed, but quietly, staying in the hallway where they couldn't see me. Leo was already there, curled on the couch, arms wrapped around himself like a child in a cartoon trauma scene. His face was pale, but his eyes. I saw it immediately. They weren't wide with fear. They were watching. Calculating. Like he was gauging how well his little act was landing. She hit me, he said, his voice breaking in all the right places. I told her I didn't want to give her my tablet and she shoved me. Hard. She does it all the time. I felt the air leave my lungs like someone had sucker punched me. Mira didn't move, didn't flinch. She just stood there, lips parted, blinking slow. Dad was pacing. That's how I knew it was serious. He only paced when the stock market tanked or when Mom cried hard enough to make him uncomfortable. You laid a hand on your brother? He barked, pointing so violently his finger shook. After everything we've done for you? Mira's voice was quiet. Even. I didn't touch him. He has bruises, Mira. Mom shrieked, gesturing toward Leo's elbow where, yeah, there was a faint smudge of blue, but I'd seen that happen when he tripped playing soccer 3 days ago. I'd seen it. I knew it. But I said nothing, because in that moment, their rage was volcanic. Their fury already decided. Mira looked from Mom to Dad, then back to Leo, who gave a tiny sniffle for extra effect. You think I would hurt him? She asked. Really? After everything? You're not the person we thought you were, Mom said coldly. And we won't have violence in this house. Mira's shoulders drew back. I thought she'd explode. Finally scream. Call them liars. Point out that Leo had been lying since the day he realized it got him out of trouble. But instead, she just breathed. One long inhale. And then, softly. Okay, that was it. Dad told her she had until the end of the week to pack her things. That she'd be staying with an aunt until she figured herself out. That she was 17 and lucky they weren't pressing charges. Mom didn't even look at her as she said it. Leo buried his face in the couch cushions like the guilt would suffocate him if he looked at her for more than a second. I watched from the hallway as Mira walked to the stairs, climbed them slowly, and disappeared into her room. She didn't slam the door. She didn't cry. She just closed it. And I swear to you, in that moment, something in this house shifted. Like the foundation tilted just a few degrees off-center. Because Mira was gone within 48 hours. And whatever innocence we thought we had as a family, it left with her. It was raining the night she left. Not the kind of rain you hear in movies, no thunder, no flashes of lightning, no dramatic curtain of water crashing against the windows. Just a quiet, cold drizzle that made everything look smudged and tired. The driveway was slick, the porch light buzzed overhead, and Mira stood beneath it in a too-thin hoodie with a single duffel bag slung over her shoulder. No suitcase. No send-off. No one offered to walk her out. She didn't ask for a ride. It was like watching a shadow peel away from the house. She didn't say goodbye. Not to Mom, not to Dad. Leo was upstairs, conveniently asleep, though I knew he wasn't. He'd been quiet all day, suspiciously quiet, like someone who knew the bullet had left the chamber but was too scared to look at the damage it caused. Dad stayed planted in his recliner like he couldn't be bothered, flipping through the news with the volume too loud, as if turning it up could drown out what was happening 20 feet away. Mom stood by the kitchen sink, arms crossed, not even pretending to cry. Your aunt's expecting you, she'd said, her voice clipped and professional, like Mira was some delinquent being transferred between facilities. You'll have a roof. Be grateful. I watched from my bedroom window as Mira stepped out into the dark, her sneakers slapping against the wet pavement. She didn't look back. Not once. Her shoulders were squared, her chin lifted, not in defiance, but in decision. It was the walk of someone who had nothing left to prove to the people behind her. And even then, Even as she vanished into that quiet storm, I think we all underestimated what she was really walking toward. Aunt Denise was a mistake. Mira lasted 3 days there. Just 3. Denise ran her home like a suburban monastery, daily devotionals, curfews, no phones after 8 p.m. She meant well, I guess, but her version of helping Mira involved Bible verses and fixing her spirit. What Mira needed was space. Independence. A way forward. Not a sermon about rebellion and sin. On the 3rd night, before the sun rose, Mira packed up her bag again and disappeared while the house was still asleep. She left a note on the kitchen counter that said, simply, "Thanks, but I can't breathe here." I got a text later that morning. It was short. Just one line. "Do you think Jordan's family would let me crash for a few days?" Jordan Nunez had been Myra's closest friend since 8th grade, the kind of friend you could go months without seeing and pick up like nothing changed. Her family lived across town in a modest 2-bedroom duplex, tight on space, but rich in kindness. Mira didn't give them the full story. She didn't tell them about the accusation, the betrayal, the cruel silence that followed. She just said she needed somewhere safe to land. And Mrs. Nunez, God bless her, didn't ask questions she already knew the answers to. She rolled out an old mattress in the corner of her home office, gave Mira a set of towels, and told her, "As long as you respect this house, you're welcome in it." Jordan said Mira barely spoke those first few nights. She kept to herself, cleaned up after dinner without being asked, offered to help fold laundry or walk the dog. No pride, no pity. Just quiet, relentless motion. She showed up to school the next day like nothing had happened. Same ponytail. Same steady stride through the hallways. But the light behind her eyes had changed. It wasn't dimmed, it was focused. Hardened. Like whatever soft warmth she used to carry had calcified into something sharper. And then there was the notebook. The one Mira had carried around for years, usually filled with homework deadlines and track schedules. But now it had a new purpose. Jordan told me she saw Mira sitting on the floor late one night, legs crossed, that tattered composition book open in her lap and a pen flying across the pages like it was running out of time. It wasn't a diary. It was a blueprint. Lists. Calculations. Questions. Answers. Ways to earn money fast. Things I need to survive on my own. Can a 17-year-old legally rent an apartment? Startup costs for a clothing brand, low budget. She wasn't surviving. She was planning. When Jordan asked her what she was doing, Mira didn't look up. She just kept writing, eyes locked on the page like it was the only lifeline she had left. "I'm not coming back," she said, calm as if she were stating the weather. "I just need to get through the next few months. Then I'm building my way out. I'm not asking anyone for anything ever again." And I believed her. Because that was the night Mira stopped being a girl who got kicked out of her home. She became a girl who would never need a home that could kick her out again. It was the week after she left Aunt Denise's house when Mira started looking for work. She was 17, still in school, no driver's license, no bank account, just a bus pass, and that stubborn, ferocious resolve that clung to her like a second skin. She knew no one was coming to save her. She stopped hoping for apologies. Stopped checking her phone for messages from home. It took her less than 3 days to accept that if she wanted to survive, she'd have to earn it, one exhausting hour at a time. She started with the usual suspects. Fast food joints. Grocery stores. Chain pharmacies. The kind of places that didn't care if you had to resume, just that you could show up on time and fake a smile for 8 hours straight. She printed 10 copies of a basic application form from the school library, no computer of her own, not anymore, and went door to door with the precision of someone hunting more than a paycheck. She wasn't desperate. She was determined. The first few days were brutal. Manager after manager told her she needed parental consent to work more than 20 hours a week, or that they'd give her a call she knew would never come. Mira never let it show. She came home to the Nunez house at night with blistered feet and rejection letters folded neatly in her pocket, and still got up the next morning at 6 a.m. to try again. Mrs. Nunez was the one who finally handed her a lifeline, a contact at a family-owned laundromat a few blocks from the bus stop. "It's not glamorous," she warned, but the owner's daughter dropped out of the schedule last minute. "If you can keep up, he'll give you cash under the table. No questions asked." Mira nodded, didn't ask for anything else. That Saturday, she showed up at 6:45 a.m. in clean jeans and a second-hand hoodie, her hair pulled back and her hands already dry from nervous hand-washing. The place smelled like bleach and dryer sheets. The air inside was thick with steam and hum. Mr. Ramos, the owner, gave her a slow once-over and said, "You last 2 weeks, I'll give you a raise. You last a month, we'll talk hours." She lasted longer than both. The work was thankless. Mira scrubbed stains from clothes that didn't belong to her, folded piles taller than her shoulders, and learned how to clear lint traps so fast it became muscle memory. The shifts were long, the breaks short, and there were nights when her back ached so badly she had to lie on the floor of the Nunez living room just to stretch it out. But she never complained. Never called in sick. Never asked for favors. By the second week, Mr. Ramos started letting her close up by herself. By the third, she had a key to the back office. And by the fourth, she'd saved enough to open a debit card and start a savings account in her own name. It was only a few $100. Nothing really. But to Mira, it was freedom on a receipt. She kept the ATM slip tucked inside her notebook, right next to the list that read, Goals. 1. Don't owe anyone anything. 2. Buy your own space. 3. Never look back. School became background noise. She still went, still kept her grades sharp, but her mind was elsewhere, on tips from customers, sales promotions, maybe even a way to sell the vintage clothes some people dropped off without picking up. She started researching textile wholesalers in the evenings, tracing routes between fabric markets and bus stops. She watched YouTube tutorials on clothing design on Jordan's cracked iPad. Every spare second became a tool. Every dollar became a seed. One night, Jordan asked her, half joking, "So what's the end game, Mira? You wanna be, like, a fashion mogul now?" Mira didn't laugh. She didn't even look up. "I want to build something no one can take from me," she said. And something in her voice told me she meant it. It started with a jacket. An old denim thing someone had dropped off at the laundromat weeks ago and never returned for. Mira asked Mr. Ramos what happened to unclaimed clothes, and he just waved her off with a shrug. "If it's still here after 30 days, it's yours or it's trash." That was all she needed to hear. She took it home that night, still warm from the dryer, and stared at it for hours. It was faded, worn thin at the elbows, but the seams were strong and the stitching intact. Mira pulled out a bag of mismatched fabric scraps she'd collected from the donation bin behind the sewing supply store, pieces no one wanted, odd shapes and colors that made no sense together. To anyone else, it was junk. To her, it was potential. She stayed up all night with a borrowed sewing kit, patching it piece by piece, turning that jacket into something loud and strange and absolutely hers. Neon pink on one sleeve, forest green across the collar, a jagged lightning bolt stitched into the back with silver thread. It wasn't perfect. Hell, it wasn't even symmetrical. But when she wore it to school the next morning, 3 people asked where she bought it. By lunch, someone offered her $40 for it. She didn't sell it. She made another. That was the beginning. She used laundromat hours to sort through forgotten clothes and fabric scraps. At night, she sketched designs in her notebook, now swollen with taped receipts and to-do lists. She turned her half of the Nunez study into a pop-up studio, a borrowed sewing machine humming over the sound of late-night music, coffee cups littering the floor, pins stuck in her sleeves like armor. The name came out of nowhere one night, scribbled at the top of a page full of fabric calculations, Threadbare Revival. It felt right. Mira didn't just want to make clothes, she wanted to revive them. Give cast-offs new shape, new purpose. Like she was doing with her own life. Jordan helped her set up an Instagram account. Mira refused to show her face, said she didn't want her family stumbling across it. Every photo was cropped just above the chin, bold jackets, hand-stitched patches, asymmetric skirts with trailing hems. She posted twice a day, tagged local thrift markets, DM'd small influencers, left comments under every sustainable fashion post she could find. She'd work the laundromat till close, then stay up sewing until her eyes burned. For weeks, nothing happened. Then, one night, she woke up to 87 new notifications. A local art student with 20,000 followers had shared a picture of herself wearing one of Mira's reworked vests with the caption, "Can't believe this was made from a pair of curtains. Genius work from @Threadbare Revival. Handmade. Ethical. Fierce." Orders flooded in. Mira cried that night. Just for a second. Not the broken kind, the kind you let fall when you finally feel seen. She took a deep breath, wiped her face, and opened a spreadsheet. She tracked every order, every sale, every dollar. She reinvested it all, bought better scissors, a real fabric cutter, higher quality thread. She started taking appointments on Saturdays for custom pieces. Jordan became her unofficial PR rep, fielding messages and helping her schedule pickups. Mrs. Nunez even let her use the garage for storage after it became clear Mira wasn't playing at a hobby. She was building a business. And I watched it happen from the sidelines with a strange, swelling mix of awe and guilt. Because I'd stayed behind. I'd let the lie happen. I didn't say anything when she was thrown out like garbage. But Mira? She didn't let any of it touch her anymore. She was making something out of scraps. And it was working. By the end of that school year, Mira had more than just a business. She had momentum. What started as patched jackets and reworked vests evolved into something that pulsed with identity. Every stitch told a story. Every scrap she sewed into something wearable carried this quiet defiance, like she was weaving her pain, her exile, into every seam. Her tiny Instagram shop grew faster than anyone expected. Orders came in from strangers, from students at nearby schools, from city kids who couldn't afford designer fashion but wanted something original, raw, alive. And that's what Mira gave them, clothes with edges. Clothes that didn't apologize for being different. She learned fast. Not just the creative side, but the grind behind the grind, profit margins, cost per unit math, supplier emails. She started using her paychecks from the laundromat to buy bulk fabric from a warehouse out in Queens. It meant 3-hour round trips on a bus every other weekend, lugging back bolts of cloth heavier than she was, but she never complained. She tracked every expense in a color-coded spreadsheet. She kept notebooks, plural, filled with sketches, order logs, goals, hashtags to try, even notes from business podcasts she listened to on the way to school. Mira didn't just want to make clothes. She wanted control. She wanted to stand on something that was hers, that no one could twist or take. The Nunez garage became her command center. Jordan called it the factory, half joking, but it wasn't far off. Racks of fabric along the walls. A folding table covered in scissors, thread, invoices. Old mirrors lined up for fittings. Most nights, you could hear the low hum of her sewing machine all the way down the block. She worked until her fingers cramped and her shoulders locked. But she loved it. You could see it in the way she touched her work, like every thread was a rope she was climbing, out of that house, out of that lie, out of the version of herself they tried to reduce her to. And slowly, people started paying attention. A local indie fashion blog featured her after someone spotted one of her pieces at a pop-up market. A boutique owner in Brooklyn reached out about carrying a small rack of her designs. Then came a college student with a growing TikTok channel who filmed herself unboxing one of Mira's patchwork skirts. Within hours, the video hit 10,000 views. Mira nearly dropped her phone when she saw the notification. Her followers doubled overnight. By the weekend, her inbox was flooded with requests. But she didn't get swept up in it. Mira was always watching, always analyzing, always aware of how fragile it all was. She knew how easily something built from nothing could be taken, especially by the people who had already done it once. I could see it in her posture whenever I managed to visit her in secret. She'd sit with her back straight, eyes constantly flicking to her phone, her planner, the doorway. Like she was always waiting for something to fall apart, but preparing to catch it when it did. One night, I asked her what she'd do when she graduated. Her answer came without hesitation. Get my own space. Storefront, maybe. Start hiring. Build something so big they choke on it. And she meant them. Our parents. Leo. The whole broken foundation of our home. But what she didn't know, not yet, was that word of her success had already started trickling back to them. Whispers passed between old neighbors. A former teacher mentioning her brand to mom at the grocery store. A friend of dad's asking if that daughter of yours is still doing the clothes thing, what's it called? Threadbare something? Mira didn't know it yet, but the past was starting to sniff its way back toward her. And soon, they'd come knocking. Not to apologize. Not to make amends. But to pretend they never did what they did. By summer, Threadbare Revival wasn't just a side hustle, it was a name people in the scene knew. Mira had filled 4 notebooks with orders, designs, price models, and feedback surveys. She'd upgraded her machines, set up a simple e-commerce site, and even hired 2 girls from her school to help with packaging and customer service. What started in a borrowed garage now reached 5 states. Every week, more orders poured in, hand-stitched skirts, custom crop jackets, bold, angular silhouettes with Mira's signature patchwork rebellion sewn right into the seams. Her pieces didn't look like anything you'd find in a store. And that was the point. She wasn't just creating clothes. She was telling people, you don't have to fit their mold to be worth something. And people listened. It was around this time, when Mira had money in the bank, her own P.O. box, and a customer base growing faster than she could sew for, that she got the first call. It came from Mom. She let it go to voicemail. The second was from Dad. Then another from Mom. Then Leo. Then Mom again, this time trying to sound casual. Hey, sweetheart, just thinking of you. We heard you're doing something with fashion. That's so creative. We'd love to catch up soon. Mira stared at the screen like it had insulted her. I was at the garage when it happened, sorting fabric while she updated her shipping calendar. She didn't even pause her pen. Just muttered, of course. Now that I'm worth something. It didn't stop there. They started liking her business's Instagram posts. Sharing them. Mom left a comment under a photo of Mira modeling one of her coats, using a fake name like we wouldn't recognize it. Such a talented young woman. Beautiful work. Then came the texts. We're so proud of you. When can we see you? Come home for dinner sometime. Let's talk. Every message carefully worded. No apology. No mention of what they'd done. Not even a breadcrumb of regret. Just this sudden, sanitized interest, as if they'd forgotten they threw her out into the cold based on a lie they never once questioned. Mira didn't respond to any of them. But I could see it wore on her. Not because she wanted their approval. Not anymore. But because their sudden affection came so predictably. So insultingly late. She'd cried every night for a week after they kicked her out. She'd scrubbed other people's sweat and blood off laundromat uniforms to afford dinner. She'd slept on a mattress in a garage for 6 months. And now that she had a feature in NYC Style Wire and was booked at her first streetwear expo, now they missed her? It got worse. They showed up. Literally. Mira was hosting a local pop-up at a Brooklyn artist co-op, a big moment for her. Months of work, money on the line, a crowd of new clients and influencers coming to see her collection in person. She'd booked a space, decorated it herself, set up a display rack with her name painted in thick silver brushstrokes above the doorway. Threadbare Revival, built from the ashes. It was perfect. Until I saw them. Mom. Dad. Leo. They walked in like it was a family reunion. Dad even had the audacity to say, "Wow, Mira, this is really impressive. You've come so far. Your mother and I always knew you had it in you." He smiled like he hadn't once told her she was too emotional to lead anything. Like he hadn't believed a 10-year-old boy over his own daughter. Mira didn't blink. She didn't smile. She didn't even stop arranging the display. Just said, "Don't touch anything. This isn't your space." Mom tensed, her mouth twitching with that familiar half-smile she used whenever she didn't know how to be vulnerable. "Honey, we're just here to support you. Let bygones be bygones." Mira looked up then. Really looked at them. "I didn't forget," she said, quiet but razor-sharp. I remember exactly how I ended up sleeping in someone else's garage. How you didn't ask a single question before shoving me out. You don't get to show up now and pretend we're fine. Leo, quiet until now, took a step forward. I was just a kid. She stared at him, eyes cool and unreadable. And now you're old enough to know what you did. No one spoke after that. I think they expected her to soften, to melt, to wrap her arms around them and cry over how far she'd come. But Mira wasn't that girl anymore. She'd buried her forgiveness under hard work and silence. She'd built her own world, and there was no door left open for the ones who burned the last one down. They left, awkward and quiet, trying not to make a scene. Mira didn't watch them go. Just turned back to her rack, ran a hand down the collar of a jacket she made from her old-school uniform blazer. The irony wasn't lost on me. That night, as we packed up boxes and counted orders, she finally looked over at me and said, "Let them talk. Let them try. But they'll never get a single thing from me again." And I knew she meant it. The morning after the pop-up, Mira didn't even mention them. Not over breakfast, not while replying to customer emails, not while folding unsold stock or checking her Venmo receipts. You'd think running into your entire estranged family at your first big public event would rattle you. But with Mira, there was no spiral. No venting. No passive-aggressive Instagram story to hint at betrayal. Just more work. If anything, she was calmer, like seeing them again had confirmed something she'd already known deep down. They hadn't changed. They still couldn't say the word sorry. Still couldn't own the part they played in tearing her down. They'd seen the success she built and thought that gave them a shortcut back into her life. But Mira didn't build threadbare revival for them. Every hem, every patch, every late-night stitch was for herself. For survival. For revenge, not in the way that burns bridges, but in the kind that builds an empire right in front of the people who thought you'd disappear. It wasn't long before the next attempt came. This time a letter. Handwritten. In Mom's neat, teacher-perfect cursive. Folded into an envelope with a return address on the back, but no name. Like she couldn't decide whether to sign it as Mom or Margaret, or maybe she thought Mira would throw it out if she saw who it was from. The letter was long. 3 pages. Mostly fluff. Updates on Leo. A story about some neighbor Mira hadn't seen in years. Mentions of your old room, like it was still waiting for her, as if she hadn't been kicked out of it before her 18th birthday. Toward the end, there was a line that stood out, not an apology, but a whimper wrapped in sugar. "We don't always say the right things, but we're still your family. I hope one day you'll come back." Mira read it once. No emotion. Just a small exhale, folded it again, and tossed it into the shoebox she kept labeled documents, the same one that held her birth certificate, LLC papers, and the eviction notice from when they told her she wasn't welcome under their roof. It sat on the bottom, under tax forms and fabric invoices. Nothing special. Nothing sacred. After that, the tone changed. Dad tried calling me, to talk sense into her. He sounded like he was running out of ways to spin the story. He said Mira was being dramatic. That it's been long enough. That she should be grateful they let her come back if she wanted to. I didn't even bother with the lie. I told him she didn't want to. I told him I didn't blame her. And when he started that whole tired speech about what it means to be a family, I reminded him that he kicked his daughter out based on a 10-year-old's lie without hesitation. Without proof. Without care. There was a long silence after that. And then he hung up. The next week, I heard from an old neighbor that my parents had been reaching out to friends, trying to reframe what happened. They were telling people Mira had gone off to chase her entrepreneurial spirit, that they supported her independence. The lie was laughable. They weren't ashamed of what they did. They were ashamed that it didn't end how they expected. Because Mira didn't fall apart. She soared. She had her own space now, leased a microloft just outside the city. Half studio, half showroom. Whitewashed brick walls, racks of handmade jackets, a clean sewing table with her name on the lease and her logo stenciled on the windows in black vinyl. Threadbare revival wasn't just real, it was profitable. She'd just signed a short-term deal with a sustainable fashion collective, and her work was scheduled to be featured in a fall capsule launch. She had interns, branding kits, a booking calendar, and still, she lived modestly. Mira didn't want flash. She wanted freedom, control, stability. She wanted to know that no one could yank the floor out from under her again. She invited me over one night. First time I'd seen the place. I brought pizza. We ate on the floor, her laptop open between us, invoices and design drafts splayed out like a fortune spread. I asked her, "Do you ever think about going back?" She looked at me for a long moment, then shook her head. "Not even for revenge. They've already lost me. That's the part they can't undo." I nodded, but the way she said it stuck with me for days. Because that was it, wasn't it? They hadn't just lost access to her business, her time, her talent. They'd lost her. The version of Mira that wanted their approval was gone. All that was left was someone stronger. Someone they no longer recognized. And someone they'd never be able to reach again, no matter how many letters they sent or posts they liked or stories they rewrote. Mira had cut the thread. And there were no exchanges. No refunds. No coming home. It was a full year after they kicked her out when the final message came. This time, it wasn't a voicemail or a text or a letter pretending to be anything but a last attempt at revisionist history. It was an email, sent to the official Threadbare Revival contact form. No greeting. No signature. Just one sentence. "Please call us. Your mother isn't well." I showed it to Mira while we were at a small business showcase downtown. Her clothes had just walked their first makeshift runway, draped on models who believed in the mission as much as the look. There were cameras. Applause. A dozen new buyers waiting for samples. Mira read the message once. Her face didn't move. Her hands, perfectly still a moment earlier, slowly began folding the edge of her pop-up tablecloth, the same one she'd hand-sewn with her logo months ago. She stared down at the fabric for a long time, then said quietly, "They never asked if I was okay." That was the thing. Not once. Not in any of their calls, their letters, their attempts to wedge themselves back into her life. Not once had they said, "We were wrong." Not once had they owned the damage, the exile, the betrayal they so swiftly handed out the day Leo, her little brother, told them a lie that suited their narrative. Because Mira had always been the strong one. The responsible one. The easy one to blame because she wouldn't break. They didn't expect her to thrive without them. But she did. She grew beyond them. Past them. Into someone they didn't know how to talk to anymore. Someone who no longer made herself small to fit inside their family picture. I didn't tell her what to do. That wasn't my place. I'd made my silence once. I wasn't going to repeat it. She didn't respond to the email. She didn't call. Instead, she went home, her home, and packed up 3 orders for overnight delivery. She answered press questions for an upcoming feature. She restitched the sleeve of a jacket that had snagged during the showcase. And then, when the night grew still and the city lights painted her studio in gold, she opened her notes app and wrote a message. It wasn't addressed to them. It was addressed to herself. They didn't love me. They loved who I made things easier for. She paused, then added, "But I love me now. And that's enough." I visited her 2 weeks later. She had a new couch. Not a fancy one, second-hand, soft and low to the floor. She was curled into it with her laptop on one side and a cup of green tea on the other. There was a new jacket hanging on the mannequin by the window, black denim, embroidered with silver thread across the shoulders. The words stitched into the back in Mira's tight, methodical hand. Built from the silence. I asked her if she'd heard from them again. She shook her head. "They don't know how to want me without owning me." I sat there quietly, watching her. Realizing she wasn't angry anymore. She wasn't plotting. She didn't need revenge to sting or land or scar. What she needed was already done. She had built a life. One they could never enter. One they had no key to. The final victory wasn't that they wanted her back. It was that she didn't want them. Not anymore.